Have you ever stopped to think about how radio waves, which are totally silent, learned how to talk? Well, today we're peeling back the layers on the brilliant technology that gave a voice to the airwaves, amplitude modulation. You probably know it as good old AM radio. Let's get into it. You see, in the very beginning, radio wasn't about music or talk shows at all. It was basically wireless telegraphy. The transmitters they had, called spark gap transmitters, could only send out these short pulses of energy. On the receiving end, it sounded like a sharp buzz, which was perfect for sending Morse code, dot dot dash, but totally useless for carrying the complex sound of a human voice. And that was the huge question, the big challenge for the pioneers at the turn of the 20th century. They had this amazing new way to communicate instantly over huge distances, but it was completely mute. So how'd they crack the code? How did they figure out how to make a silent wave carry a sound? To really appreciate the genius of the solution, we first have to get our heads around the problem. And it all came down to the specific kind of wave they were using. Okay, so here's the crucial difference. Those old transmitters created something called damped waves. The best way to picture it is to think about ringing a bell. You get that loud ding, and then it just quickly fades away into silence. You can't carry a continuous sound, like a voice, on a wave that's constantly dying out. What they desperately needed was a continuous wave, a perfectly steady, unbroken radio signal that could act as a kind of invisible conveyor belt for information. And that need for a continuous wave leads us directly to the aha moment, the ingenious idea that changed communications forever. Once you have that steady wave, you can start playing with it. You could modulate it to carry a message. The name, Amplitude Modulation, really tells you everything you need to know. You take that steady, continuous carrier wave and you vary its amplitude. That's just its strength or its power. And you do this in perfect rhythm with the sound wave of your message, whether it's a voice or a piece of music. The carrier wave literally starts to mimic the shape of the sound. Here's a really simple way to think about it. Imagine you've got a flashlight pointed at a wall, making a steady, unchanging circle of light. That's your carrier wave. Now imagine you've got a dimmer switch, and you start turning it up and down to the rhythm of someone speaking. The light gets brighter and dimmer, perfectly matching the voice. Someone watching that light could decode the speech just by seeing its changing brightness. That, in a nutshell, is exactly what AM does. Now, this wasn't just some neat technical trick. This was a full-blown revolution. It's what turned radio from a specialized tool for telegraph operators into a true medium for the masses, and its impact was felt almost right away. And this quote, this captures a truly historic moment. On December 23, 1900, a Canadian inventor, Reginald Fessenden, broadcast these words over a mile, and they were reportedly perfectly intelligible. For the very first time in human history, a radio wave had actually spoken. That first test just lit the fuse on a period of incredible progress. A few years later, in 1906, Fessenden held the first ever public entertainment broadcast. But the real game changer was the invention of the vacuum tube in 1912. All of a sudden, generating those essential continuous waves was cheap and easy. And by the 1920s, the whole thing just exploded. The age of AM broadcasting had begun, creating the world's first electronic mass medium. But, like with any technology, AM was a series of trade-offs. It had some huge advantages that made it the perfect tool for its time, but it also came with some serious drawbacks. The biggest pro, by far, was simplicity. It was pretty easy to build an AM receiver, which meant they were cheap, and millions of people could actually afford one. That's what made mass broadcasting possible. On the flip side, though, AM is a notorious power hog, and it's incredibly susceptible to noise. You know that static and crackle you hear on an AM station during a thunderstorm? That's actually electromagnetic interference from the lightning getting mixed right into the radio signal. This chart really drives home just how inefficient AM is. It's pretty wild when you see it laid out like this. A full 2/3 of the power pumped out by a standard AM transmitter goes into just broadcasting the carrier wave, the part with no information on it. All the useful stuff, the voice or the music, is crammed into that remaining 1/3 in something called the sidebands. It's like sending a massive semi-truck just to deliver a single postcard. So given all those inefficiencies, you might think AM is just a relic of history, something you'd find in a museum. But you'd be wrong. Its legacy is not only alive and well, but it has evolved in some pretty incredible ways. Even today, AM is still the technology of choice in situations where simplicity and reliability are everything. Pilots still use AM radios to communicate because they just work. Amateur radio operators and shortwave broadcasters use it to talk to people on the other side of the planet. And of course, it's still the undisputed home of talk radio, where a clear, long-range signal matters way more than CD-quality audio. But the story doesn't stop there, because that fundamental idea, changing a wave's amplitude to carry information, has been refined and supercharged into a technology that quite literally powers our modern digital world. It's called quadrature amplitude modulation, or just QAM. It is a direct descendant of AM radio. It's a super complex method that varies both the amplitude and the phase of a wave, letting us pack enormous amounts of digital data into a signal. And this is the technology that powers your home internet connection and your Wi-Fi. The core idea from that old-timey radio is what's connecting you to the web right now. So when you step back and look at the whole journey, from teaching waves to whisper their first few words, all the way to delivering the entire internet to our homes, the principle of amplitude modulation has had an absolutely incredible run. Which kind of leaves us with one last thought. AM gave a voice to the airwaves. So what do you think our next great broadcast will be?